There are now people in their mid to getting on to advanced teens who have never known, obviously, a world without the web. In fact, there may be 20-year-olds who've never known anything about that. Have they developed strange thumbs? Do they have peculiar ways of talking and listening? Do their eyes glaze over when they have to concentrate for more than 30 seconds? No, I don't believe any of that.
Strange thumbs, weird ways of talking, glazing eyes. The so-called Generation Web Stephen Fry describes here seems to be messed up, at least according to people that either struggle with the web or still believe that it won't enforce anyway. But yeah, here I am, and I feel and hopefully also look pretty normal, at least my thumbs do. But I feel like the grown-ups have a point, and in this documentary I want to find out how the web and its possibilities affect the generation that grew up in its presence. I based my research on the two original visions of the web, being an information universe and providing a space for visual communities. Therefore, I'm using interviews from the BBC series The Virtual Revolution, aired in 2010. Let's start with the first vision of the web, the information universe and its current state.
Now, in today's universe, everybody has the British Library on their doorstep, in their mobile phone, on their laptop, in their office, and suddenly we have unbelievable resources close to hand, and we can seek information in any particular way we like, with so many possibilities.
You have an infinite amount of resources available to you, or information available to you. And I think people, or this next generation, I guess they're much more knowledgeable about any topic that you can think of.
I look at my son, who's 8, and he asked me, my wife, when Michael Jackson passed away, my wife muttered something at the breakfast table about him being a criminal. And my son later asked me, right, was that true? And I said, well, you know, the dilemma of explaining the difference between accusation and proof and so forth, we're going along in this conversation, and I say essentially no one knows, right? There were these questions, nothing was ever proved, and he looked at me and said, "Not even Wikipedia?" And I realized he'd never asked a question before, because he tends to be in the domain of facts. What's the fastest train, Dad? I have no idea, but Wikipedia does. What's the tallest building? I'll just look it up on Wikipedia. And suddenly he comes up to a question that's entirely interpretive. And clearly his worldview was a little bit shaken, because there'd never been a question he couldn't answer before. And so you wonder how much of his relationship to the factual is being shaped by the idea that you don't need to guess or estimate or remember. If you can get your hands on a keyboard, you can find out right then.
Speaking of worldview,
I think one of the things that has happened to the first generation of kids to grow up always being online, which by the way are my kids, they have never experienced dial-up or anything like that. They've always had always on. And what I've seen is they have a global awareness that was not present in my generation. They really feel as if this is one world. They also feel as if they are always connected to everyone else. There is a feeling of being connected that I did not have in my generation. And I think the third thing is that there is a sense of movement forward, the sense of going somewhere, of maybe you might call it progress, that I think was not present in previous generations.
Feeling connected. That is also what virtual communities are about.
People were asking me whether anyone besides some kind of maybe anti-social electrical engineer would be interested in using computers to communicate with people. And I was very excited, because what I had discovered in bulletin board systems and ultimately the well were real people who became part of my life. In fact, babysat for my daughter. I was at their weddings. I went to their funerals. I sat by their deathbeds. Anything that you do in a real community was happening with this group of people. And I wanted to get the word out that even though we met through computers. We're real people in our relationships.
Virtual communities are online spaces in which people meet, connect, and even become part of each other's real lives. But especially for the kids today, it also works the other way around, according to Danah.
Think about what happens when you were doing that with your friends, right? You were there, you were joking around, you were gossiping, you were flirting, you were kind of consuming culture and consuming merchandise, but it was part of this all-encompassing social experience. The same thing is actually happening fully online, right? So all of those everyday practices, the gossip, the flirting, the joking around, that's taking place online. And it's taking place online with the same kinds of friends that took place in the mall, right? You met up with all the kids at school, but you also saw the kids at the neighboring school, and you're like, hey, who are you? What's that about? That same thing is where we're seeing it play out. So young people who are engaged online, they're primarily engaged with the people they already know. They're friends from school, they're friends from after-school activities, they're friends from around the community. That's where we see social status becoming really critical. So it's no longer the Nikes that are the particular status markers, it's the way of actually maintaining certain kinds of friendships and getting certain kinds of responses from certain celebrities. All of that play goes on. We also see marginalized kids who were desperately seeking some sort of support, and were often at loss, out in more traditional senses of schools or whatnot. Finding a community online, and this is one of the more powerful narratives of the internet, right? Your queer kids who can actually find people like them, who can support them. They're much more willing to be public in a traditional sense because they're desperate for somebody who might be like them. For the popular kid, it's much more about being public to the school, people who will give them credit, that will give them status.
So not being popular in your peer does not mean that you have to be alone, thanks to several online communities. Moreover, you can get in contact with people helping you with a career like Master Shorty did.
And do you think that's a part of the personal aspect of the web? I mean, are they fans, or are they people who are seeking to produce music?
I'm both, man. Like I believe the internet's full of it's music lovers in general, and just because you work in music doesn't mean you stop loving music. I'm also a music lover, and I'm a fan, and I go on as a fan online as well as an artist. And in doing that, I meet other people that do the same thing that are also artists. So it's like a big community online with up-and-coming rappers, singers, musicians, producers. And if you can literally just bond with a lot of these people online, i.e. with the kind of style of music that they're doing. And then with my producer, Labyrinth, I met him via a friend, but we really made a connection online and kept in contact online. And from then on, it's history. We made an amazing album and created a sound together.
Short, self-expression is easy today. That was different 50 years ago.
In the 20th century, if you had something to say in public, you couldn't, period. Right? If you were a civilian, if you were a citizen but not a media professional, you could not broadcast a message, no matter how hard you tried. In fact, people who went out of their way to try to get messages out in public through amateur channels, right, holding up signs on the street or by the roadside, were widely regarded as being kind of off their rockers. And that change is enormous, that anyone who wants to participate, has at least the means to participate, is a huge change. So in that sense of the word democratic, the web has been this huge increase in the participatory logic of the media environment.
It's time for an interim conclusion. Kids today can get all the information they want within seconds, make friends from all over the world, and can express themselves more than any other generation before. So everything's fine?
Well, I think this generation has a sense that information wants to be free, and information about themselves wants to be free. And in a way, there's a kind of self-surveillance that I think that young people don't think about in political terms. But it is a political issue. People put their lives on the screen. They put really intimate details of their lives out there, and with very little thought that there might be people using that information in ways that are not benign.
Again, what constitutes private information, right? From an adult's perspective, it's identifying information is their absolute fear, right? The idea that it's your name, your address, your phone number, anything that will identify you. And this has to do with the idea of physical risk. But for young people, it's about all right, fine, you can call me by my name. Why is that a big deal? It's more about the things that make you vulnerable. And so when we think about privacy and private information, it's really a question of vulnerability. And so from adult perspective, we're really concerned about physical vulnerabilities, and increasingly about psychological vulnerabilities. And for a lot of young people, it's about social vulnerabilities. So, how do I make certain that I don't get teased, harassed, bullied because of the things that I make available out there? How do I make certain that what I put out there makes me seem cool and not lame? How do I balance that? So the social vulnerability is the privacy fight for young people. The physical and psychological is the fight for parents. And so we see these two constantly at odds, because part of putting things out in public is to achieve status, you need to actually make yourself vulnerable at a certain level. And how do you actually do that in a way that balances the risks and the benefits?
What this generation looks like as it grows up with it. They're now a generation in retreat. They'll text, but they won't talk. One of the things that has been so, for somebody like me who does interviews and who believes in what you learn from the face, from, the philosophers tell us that we become human when we're confronted with another face through the voice, through the inflection of the voice. These kids don't want to see a face, they don't want to see a voice. They want to text. So that in a way we're no longer nourished but consumed in some way by what we've created. And I think that's very, it's not all good. It's not all good.
But there's hope.
People think of I guess, the dangers of people trying to trick individuals with deceiving them with information that's not correct, that posting rumors. But again, I think this next generation is potentially more wary, or I guess conscious of that they are making their own decisions. They understand if they're reading a post or about to click on a link, where that's going to take them. So I think
with online materials, everything is persistent by its nature, right? That's one of the powers of the internet. And we think of it really as a useful affordance, right? Because if something is persistent, that means you can get access to it at a different time, right? That's the opportunity for asynchronicity. But it's also how this material is available 10, 15, 20 years later. And right now we're in that moment of transition, that point of absolute confusion, the uncertainty of, what does it mean that you have everything up there? Down the road, it just becomes the way things are, and it's interesting to see the individuals for whom that's already part of their story. And that's the power of the early adopters.
Okay, it seems like growing up with the internet has advantages and disadvantages. And now?
Well, yeah, I mean, some genies, when they're let out of a bottle, can cause problems, and they certainly can't ever go back in the bottle. When cars first arose, people were horrified at the deaths on the road. Horrified. They couldn't believe it. I mean, there were hundreds of people being squelched every day. It was grotesque. And if you just braked in a car at 30 miles an hour, you'd kill yourself on the steering wheel, you'd break your neck. People were dying all the time. Did they say, oh, that's it then? We can't have cars, sorry. In the same way as if someone says, actually, these mobile phones do give out microwaves, and they will give you brain cancer, are we going to say, oh, well, that's the end of that technology then? Not on your Nelly. There's a risk-reward ratio here, and for us, the reward is so great that whatever the risk is, we try and contain it and understand it at best, but what we don't do is say the risk is too great.
In conclusion, the Generation Web is more knowledgeable and can express itself however they like in whatever community they like. Both visions of an information universe and a virtual community seem fulfilled. But with this freedom comes massive privacy issues that this generation probably has to tackle.
Are the kids going to be doing okay, or should we?
Kids are all right. The kids are all right. No, I absolutely believe that the possibilities and the opportunities for people to live a rich, passionate life that allows them to express themselves in all the ways that they want to, regardless of where they live geographically. I don't think it gets any better than that.